welcome to the Police Accountability Report. I want you to know that if you have evidence of police misconduct, please email it privately to us at par@therealnews.com. And please like, share, and comment on our video. You know I read your comments, and I appreciate them. You can follow the Police Accountability Report on Facebook or Instagram, or at Eyes on Police at Twitter. And of course, you can follow me directly at Taya's Baltimore on Facebook and Twitter. And I want to thank you for joining us for the first season of the Police Accountability Report. We are taking a short break, but we will be back with a new show premiering on YouTube December 5th. Thank you, James. But please keep sending in your tips. We will still be reading them, and we still need them. And I want to give a quick shout out to Noli D, who's been a good friend to the show. So as we've said before, and we will say again, the point of the show is to hold the politically powerful institution of policing accountable. Part of that process is examining the political forces that empower policing in a country inundated with it. Case in point is the story we are going to tell you today, a story that reveals just how above the law enforcement really is. It's part of a political and cultural phenomena that has created the two-tiered criminal justice system we've called out before. But this dual system of leniency for some and cruelty for others is not enforced simply by dictate. No. As we will see today, it is in part the result of the powerful tools of rhetoric that, along with the complicity of mainstream media, tells a story that justifies the stark imbalance of American policing and makes a style of unjust justice possible. Remember, as the Greek philosopher Aristotle once said, rhetoric is the process of making the worse appear the better cause. But in the realm of policing and law enforcement, that concept has been turned into a narrative akin to a religion. And what is the impact of this rhetoric on the psyche of our country? Let's examine the past to understand the present. As we all know, one of the most pernicious policies in this country has been the war on drugs. For decades, police used the pretext of drug crimes to initiate illegal arrests, seize property, and disrupt poor communities. Stephen, we've discussed the special psychology of the war on drugs, but it's also bolstered by a mythology, isn't it?
Well, yeah, the mythology of the war on drugs is a mythology of the perniciousness of the object. You know, that possession of an object somehow was comported an entire spectrum of some sort of, force or some sort of evil, or in many ways the racialized animosity or the animosity of the other, but and the animosity against the poor. And that object allowed the police to basically circumvent the civil rights of almost all of us. And of course, against that was the narrative that you saw in media and you saw in Hollywood films and everything, that the impediment to somehow taming that object and the people who possessed it were the civil rights that had been granted to us through the Constitution of the United States. It was a dual sort of narrative that said, on the one hand, embodying this object in a proximity to it is evil, and on the other hand, the only way to extinguish it is to violate the principles that this country was founded on. So it was really a way to make policing sort of the prime narrator of why some people weren't deserving of political agency.
Right. It reminds me of that saying that someone who's willing to deny liberty for the sake of security deserves neither.
Yeah.
So this constant reiteration that conditions like poverty, addiction, and general malaise are the byproducts of a moral or personal failure, while untrue, needs a social agent to make it real. And that agent, as Stephen discussed, is policing. Policing is the myth-making machine that equates poverty with moral failure, and inequity is a byproduct of productive capitalism. Think about it. How else could a government agency take billions of dollars of property without due process, or take the freedom of tens of millions of people because they possess a substance, or shoot and kill us over a car stop? How can these injustices be sustained without the rhetoric that accompanies it? The idea that police are in an existential struggle and under threat. It's a narrative that is assembled one illegal arrest at a time. And of course, to drive this point home even further, we have a story that reveals the true imperative of the so-called justice system, how it protects those who enforce it, and how the so-called tough on crime laws aren't predicated upon justice, but they are there to create a potent scarlet letter to wield against the victims of governmental overreach and neglect. Case in point is a police misconduct story we referenced before, the conviction and sentencing of Baltimore police officer Michael Gentile. Gentile was convicted of using a handgun in the commission of a felony when he pointed a gun at our guest, Kevon Miller, and we will let Mr. Miller tell the story. Not just about the crime itself, but what happened when it was time to mete out justice. Kevon, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So first, just tell us about your encounter with Officer Gentile. What happened?
Well, on the night in question, I was actually like taking a break from work. I was just going to, it was kind of cold out, so I was going to go get a hot coffee from the convenience store not too far from my house. From my job. After I got the tea, I'm walking up Monument Street, as I get towards Edison and Monument, I'm crossing the street. I'm like in the middle, what do they call that?
The crosswalk?
Yeah, like in the middle of the crosswalk. And as I'm getting ready to cross the street, a car comes turning the corner really fast and it almost hit me. So like as the car almost hit me, I'm trying to back up and it's a curb right behind me. So it's like, all right, I kind of tripped over the curb and it's like the momentum of my hand made the T come out of my hand and it hit his car. So he rode up maybe about 100 feet, if that, and he stopped his car and got out of his car and he said something that I really couldn't hear, but I'm like, basically like, you almost hit me with your car. That's what I'm yelling to him back. Like, you almost hit me with your car. But I'm still walking towards my job, crossing the street. And he get out of his car, and it's like maybe 3 seconds later after he get out of his car, he pull out his gun. He pull out his gun, he pointed at me, and he started to walk me down. I got my hands in the air, and he steady coming close to me, like, what the fuck did you throw at my car? I'm sorry if I'm not
It's
supposed
okay.
to.
Okay.
It's okay.
But
We're
like,
just gonna be on YouTube.
What did you throw in my car? I'm like, man, it's almost high tea. I mean, it's high tea. You almost hit me with your car. So it's like, he's not hearing anything I'm saying. It's like he's mad. So he keep asking me the same question over and over. What the fuck was that on my car? This, that, and the third. And I keep repeating that it was hot tea. And I keep repeating, you almost hit me with your car. So it was like, after that, he's getting closer to me. Now he's maybe your distance away from me. So that's maybe like 10 feet, if that. He was calling me stupid ass, stupid. He called me, after he started calling, he called me a bunch of names, pretty much whatever you could in the book. And then next thing you know, he was like, you stupid fucking nigga, turn around, which I was already on the ground. I had my hands up. He told me to sit on the ground. So I'm like sitting on the curb. And he told me to turn around. So once I turned around, he told me to lay flat. So now I'm laid flat. I got my hand stretched out, and it's like my chin is on the ground. And it's like 2 seconds after that, he asked me again, what the fuck was that on my car? So after that, it was like, boom, a hard press against my head, which I knew he kicked me because once he did that, once he stomped my head, he busted open my chin. So after that, I kind of like turned around and I'm like trying to sit on my butt. And as I'm sitting on my butt, I could see his foot pulling back. So I knew he kicked the back of my head, or stomped the back of my head. And after he do that, I'm like, man, you just put your, like, what you just hit me. Like, what was the point of that?
Right.
And he was like, man, you threw something on my car. I'm like, man, it was T. Again, I keep saying the same thing. And he just cussing me out. He just saying a bunch of words. I can't remember everything verbatim what he said, but he was saying a lot of, like, degrading words to me.
And the gun was pointed at you this whole time.
Yeah, so it's like,
Did at any point he say that he was a police officer?
no, not that. He didn't, he never said that he was a police officer.
So for all you knew, this was a
just thought-
deranged
Just a road
madman
rage.
that was
Yeah, I didn't know who
pulling
he
a gun
was.
on you.
And, you know, my nerves started to really kick in, even though I had to kind of like play it cool because nobody was out there. It was like dark out there. It was kind of late at night. And it was only kind of like cars riding past. So I didn't know what he was gonna do. He could have shot me and, you know, could have got away with it, but.
Didn't it turn
Anyway.
out there was a witness that actually saw him
Yeah,
pull a gun on you?
it was a lady that was driving by and she saw it. And as she saw it, she called the police and let them know what was happening. So that was kind of like one of the you know, things that was working on my side because when initially I started to tell a story about what happened, I really didn't think nobody would believe me. You know, so once I knew there was a witness, I kind of felt good about that. But again, as I'm starting to get up, he's starting to back up, but he still got the gun pointed towards me. And as he backing up, he's still calling me names, but he kind of like walking towards his car. So now as he's walking towards his car, I'm like walking towards my job, but I'm also looking for my phone because I'm trying to like get his license plate or something.
Right.
And I didn't have my phone. It was inside of work. So once he got into his car, I'm kind of angry because I'm like, man, I'm feeling my chin. I had like a Ravens hoodie on and it's really bloody. So I'm upset. So once he get into his car, it's like I started to like walk towards his car, but I'm like faking like I got something in my hand, like it's a phone or something, like I'm trying to take a picture of his car. Once he see me try to do that, he sped off.
Yeah, so tell us, I mean, didn't you actually go to police headquarters to speak with him, to maybe find out
Yeah.
where his head was at when he did this?
I'm like, yeah, man. I started to brainstorm, and I'm like, it's a police precinct, maybe 3 or 4 blocks up the street from where I work. So I'm like, man, after work, I'm saying to myself, I'm going to go up there. I'm like, I gotta see what's up. I gotta confront him. I gotta see like, what was the reason for him assaulting me?
Right.
So that was my whole point of going to the police precinct. So when I got to the police precinct, I kind of like rode around that little parking lot for a second. Well, not even a parking lot, like outside of their parking lot, but I saw his car. And it still had like the tea residue and like the sugar and stuff on his car.
Wow.
So it was a police officer that was sitting outside of the, I was basically right to the side of his car. And I asked the police officer that was sitting there, and I said, is this a police officer's car? He asked me why. I kind of explained to him what happened. He was like, man, there's nothing really I can do to you. I have to refer you to my sergeant. He called the sergeant. The sergeant came to meet me outside. I started to tell him the story, and I'm like, basically like, man, I want to see this guy. I want to talk to him. I want to see, like, what was the reason for it? Officer Janis comes downstairs, and once I see him, he's like, is this him? I'm like, yeah, that's him. And Officer Janis come downstairs. Once he see me, like, got his hands on his belt, it's like he very confident. He's like very confident.
Really?
He started to look at me. I'm like, I looked him right in his eyes, said, man, like, what was the reason for you doing that? Honestly, at that particular time, I was looking for a reason. I was looking for a reason for him to tell me why he did it. Like, I was stressed out. I was having a bad day. I'm like, man, he was like, even if he would have told me, like, man, I thought you just threw something at my car like you were trying to hurt me or something. Right. That's what drew my reaction. If he'd have let me know why he did it, I probably wouldn't have took it this far. Mm-hmm. Because, again, I'm an understanding person. I understand people make mistakes, and sometimes things trigger people to do things that they wish they never did. Right. But he didn't give me an apology or anything. He basically, in a nutshell, said to me, it was my fault. He basically told me that his job is stressful, which I know it is. You're a police officer. You got to deal with a lot. He's like, my job's stressful. I got to deal with a lot every day. Then he started talking about the guys that be on Monument Street and how he got to ride up and down Monument Street. And basically, he was saying he got to see people like me every day. Pretty much, he got to deal with people like me. I took that, I took offense to that in a way, because it's like, what do you mean? You gotta deal with people like me. Pretty much, people on Monument Street is nothing but black and brown people, which means, black and, Hispanic people that lives in that area. So he basically talking about he got to deal with my color and the kids and the men that look like me. So my response to that was, man, listen, I have to deal with these same people on a daily basis, and I have to deal with people like you. What I mean by that, when I say I got to deal with people like you, is I got to deal with cops like you, prejudiced people like you, people that don't like me because of my skin or whatever. Like, that's what I took from that, and that's what I was trying to get him to understand. I have to deal with both. Right. You get to go home and probably live a better life than I do daily. Your stresses aren't as big as mine. I have the same amount of stress you have. It's just I don't have the cover of the shield.
Exactly.
You know, so my life is actually more dangerous than you. What I took from that conversation with that sergeant and Officer Gentile was they weren't going to do absolutely squat for me. The sergeant was basically trying to get me to go home. He just kept saying to me, man, go home, take care of your kids, get them ready for school.
Right.
Like basically trying to pat me on my back like, hey, it's all right, just let it go. Instead of doing his job.
Right. So when you were leaving the police station, you encountered some other police officers. What did they say to you?
Well, again, when I left out, I was feeling kind of defeated. I wasn't saying anything to them guys. So once I was on my way back to my work truck, and the officer stopped me. He was like, hey, man, what happened? Like, he basically asked me. I'm like, man, like, nothing. I didn't tell him nothing. I ain't doing nothing. Because, again, I felt defeated. He like, look, man, meet me up here at Urban Shopping Center. I looked at him like, meet you at Urban Shopping Center. I'm looking at him, I'm skeptical of why he telling me to meet him up there. One of his friends or partners, another police officer come up. He was like, look, man, meet him up there. He was like, I'm gonna go with you. So again, I don't really interact with police like that. So again, I was kind of nervous to go up there. But when I went up there, them guys like, man, look, this guy not right. He a racist. This is the type of things that he do. And again, I'm not putting words in these guys' mouths. This is what these guys said to me. And they're the ones that gave me the number to Internal Affairs. They're like, man, call him. That's not right what he did to you. And he's like, this man do things like this on a regular. And they started telling me a bunch of stories about their encounters with the guy. So I'm like, all right, I took the number. I sat on it all night. I'm just like looking at my chin when I went home. It's bleeding. And I'm just thinking about it. And I'm still skeptical. I'm like, man, all of these people are police. Like, what are they gonna do for me?
Right.
I ended up calling Internal Affairs that next morning. They basically took a report of everything that I said to them. But they kind of already heard something about it a little bit because they was like, man, we already got the witness phone call. So they already had the phone call of the witness reporting that it was a white male pointing a gun at a black male. So once he told me that, I'm like, all right, maybe they'll believe what I'm saying.
Right.
Because really, before all of that, and even before the witness, I'm like, there's no way in hell these people will believe what I'm saying. That's why I'm like, there's no point in me going through with it. But he told me, like, I believe what you said. I believe what you're saying because of that witness.
After you talk to IAD, after you decide that you can trust these other police officers, Officer Gentile actually ends up being convicted of using a gun in the commission of a felony, and he got the mandatory minimum sentence, which is a mandatory minimum of 5 years, and it was said that he was going to have to serve 6 out of a total 10 recommended by the prosecutor. So what happened when you were at the sentencing? I know you read your victim statement, but what happened to Officer Gentile?
Basically, well, the first time when he went for sentencing, he acquired a new lawyer like 2 days before his first initial sentencing. So while we were in court, the state's attorney was basically asking him, like, I mean, what is the reason for him acquiring a new attorney? It's basically everything is set in stone. He was found guilty already for using a gun in the commission of a felony or whatever it was. I'm not really sure on what the charges were, but he was like, there's nothing really that he can do to stop that mandatory minimum of 5 years.
Right.
So the guy, Gentile's attorney starts to talk, and somehow he didn't give the judge a clear reason. He just said, I have some things in the works. Basically, he was like, basically, it might be unorthodox, this, that, and the third, but he was like, I might be reaching, but there's some things that I will want to try. He's like, I'm not caught up to the case as much, because he just was acquired 2 days before the sentencing. So basically, Austin Gentile bought 30 days away from jail again. So we're moving on to the second part of the sentencing. So the second time we go, for some reason, the judge granted Officer Gentile appellate bond.
Right.
And I don't know what was the reasons for that. I don't know what he can appeal, because he got found guilty
By a judge.
by a judge. It wasn't even a jury. You got found guilty by a judge. And again, I don't want to really say anything bad about the judge, because I feel in a way he did what he could. Well, in the beginning stages, before all the bull crap came along, I feel he did what I felt justice was served at that particular time. Until, we come back and you give him a bond to be able to stay home until he can go back up for an appeal. And that kind of threw me for a loop, because I'm like, man, if the roles were reversed, there's no way in hell, there's no possible way I would ever get house arrest.
Right. And what was even worse was that not only does the appeal process take, months and months, like, 12 months, 18 months, the judge actually offered him time served, which means that while he's sitting at home, he was actually going to earn time against his sentence, which in theory, if they dragged the appellate process out long enough, he might hardly have to spend any time at jail whatsoever.
And that's the thing that's kind of upsetting me, is because, again, if I would have did this to Officer Gentile, if I would have pulled the gun out on him, if I would have made him lay flat on the ground, if I would have stomped the back of his head, I would be doing 20 years probably more.
Yes.
You would have charged me for the gun, you would have charged me for the assault, you would have charged me for the gun and the commission of a crime. You'd have charged me with everything you could. They had given me every freaking year possible on those charges. And there would be nothing that I can say. And when I couldn't go in there and say, oh, I had a bad day, I wish I could have took it back. There's nothing I can say. It's things that I did in my life that were way, less than what he did to me. And I had way worse things. I lost everything being in jail sometimes for things that I've done and for things that I didn't do. So I've lost everything a couple of times.
It's terrible.
And for him to be able to go in there because he's an officer, for him to be able to go in there and say, my stepfather's sick or my stepmom's sick, and start crying and say, I lost everything, I lost my job. That gains you sympathy, but that gains me nothing if I go in there saying the same exact thing. If I had his charges and I go in there and say, I can say my kid ready to die tomorrow, these people will still send me to jail. You won't give me no house arrest? And that's unfair to me. And again, that's what draws the divide of citizens and the police. Because when the police do something, they get a slap on the wrist and sent home. But regular people on the street, regular civilians, they do the same exact thing and they get sent to jail. It's not fair. It's not fair. Because you are a police officer, you should be held accountable for things that you do, because you took that oath to protect people instead of going out here doing things to hurt people. Again, when I was younger, I had a lot of incidents with the police where some of them were bad incidents, some of them were bad run-ins with the law. I mean, as far as me getting beat up, even getting robbed.
You were robbed?
Robbed by police officers.
Yes. I mean, this is nothing recent. This is like, let's say my early 20s. I'm 34, so my early 20s to my mid-20s, when you out there on the street and there's some of these guys from that gun task force, like Herschel, he's one of the main people that he will, if he know you.
Herschel rob you?
No, he didn't, but people that he were around, I don't even know the cop's name, but he used to be East Baltimore, down in that same area, doing those type of things. A lot of those cops were. Now, again, I ain't gonna say a lot, a certain select few, because I don't want to put all the cops.
We're robbing you.
Yeah, so if I had money in my pocket and they know, hey, he might be a drug dealer, people don't want to go to jail and still have to spend that money. So if I have $500 in my pocket, they'll take it. They'll take it and probably let you walk. So again, you might have had a bag of weed in your pocket, but you have $500 in your pocket. So they're gonna be like, They might even send you home with your weed, but they're gonna take your money. They're gonna take your money and ask you like, all right, so, a lot of people gonna give the money because they don't wanna have to go to jail.
Right.
They're gonna have to pay a bail to get out. They're gonna have to pay a lawyer.
Right.
And a bunch of other things that they might have to pay for.
Cheaper to give them the money.
And cheaper just to go ahead and let them take the money.
Just so people know, Herschel was one of the seven members, the original members of the Gun Trace Task Force, which were convicted of robbing residents, dealing drugs, and stealing overtime. So just
again, so for all the people that think that all these cops are just like good cops, all of them aren't. And I don't want to just discredit the good ones, because again, I didn't have police help me in time where I needed help.
Stephen, there's a really interesting argument that was put forth by a lawyer who was in that courtroom, who was really surprised to see this unorthodox ruling. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, his name is Joshua Hoffman. He's a criminal defense attorney. He just happened to wander into the courtroom when this appeal bond was being issued, and the officer was allowed to avoid the mandatory minimum sentences, which are required under the law. And he was so angry about what he saw, he wrote an editorial for the Baltimore Sun talking about how unfair it was for a police officer to avoid this punishment that would have been applied to anybody but him. So we interviewed Mr. Hoffman about why he said that. Let's take a little listen to what he said. So what was it? Was it unusual what you saw? What was unusual about it?
Well, the fact that he was out pre-trial and the fact that he got to stay home during the appeal, that 5-year mandatory minimum sentence is really serious. When I first came in the courtroom, there was a police officer next to me, and I'm gathering that this was one of the officers involved in the prosecution. And when I first started hearing what was going on, I'm like elbowing him. I'm like, what's going on? They got a cop with the 5-year mandatory minimum thing? I couldn't believe it. So I'm watching really closely at that point, and I couldn't believe that it was actually happening. And it's not that I was happy to see this man go through this or anything, but I was happy to see that there was some accountability and that a police officer was going to get treated the same way one of my clients might get treated. And when that appeal bond thing happened, it was, the wool got pulled back, and I said, okay, so the favorable treatment for police officers is still something we're doing, and this judge is going to bend over way backwards to make it happen.
So as you can see, as he points out, he's not in favor of mandatory minimums. Many people aren't in favor of mandatory minimums, but if you create them and apply them only to people who aren't police officers, it shows that they're not really mandatory minimums, right? They are meant to punish people who are not police, and they are not meant to hold everyone accountable. And that's the problem. The two-tiered system of justice, is what he was angry about.
And I think that's what the judge didn't want to give him. I think the judge did. I'm not sure. I'm not saying that that's what it is, but I think the judge didn't want to give him the 5 years. I think he felt like it was too harsh.
Right. That's the great point. I mean, one thing but mandatory minimums are horrible. People, like you're saying, you can go in front of a judge and, there are mitigating circumstances. There are things, you have family, but they're going to be like, fuck it, it's a mandatory minimum. You got to go to jail. And that's why people don't support them.
And even some judges say that they wish they had discretion, in
mandatory minimums
cases
are
where,
horrible.
someone has a hardship in their family, or saying, you really don't deserve a sentence this strong, but they say, my hands are tied, it's a mandatory minimum. But it seems like this judge found a way around it.
The mandatory minimum is meant to do one specific thing and achieve one thing, politically speaking, to take inflexibility and to dehumanize people. So once you possess a gun or you do something with a gun, you no longer are human. And anyone who ends up in that predicament for a variety of reasons is no longer human. The only person who has full human complexity is the police officer, who for some reason, as you point out, and it was extremely moving, and I'm really glad you shared this with people, that he can come out and plea hardship and the court is sympathetic. But, if you went up there, Mr. Miller, and said that, I totally agree with you, they'd be like, whatever. You know, you made your bad choice.
Yes.
And that's the whole point of mandatory minimums, to create an inflexible justice system that has no compassion and only knows cruelty.
So here we have the true imperative of American policing in stark relief. A cop convicted of a heinous crime, but trapped in the same inflexible system that gives him his power. A dilemma that the same system allows him to ultimately avoid, but a privilege afforded only to him, not others, not to us. And why is that? Why, when a cop pulls a gun and commits a crime, the system considers him in all his complexity? The judge confers on him the benefit of the doubt. His humanity is posited against the system's insatiable cruelty. But for us, the people he purports to serve, there is no such accommodation. Instead, like our guest, we would not be so lucky. And the question that must be asked is why? Why don't we, the people, merit the same consideration as Officer Gentile? The people who live in the community, the people whose wealth and taxes are drained into the bottomless abyss of police spending. Why don't we warrant the same treatment? I can tell you, because the true focus of the SWAT teams and the surveillance, the specialized units and the no-knock warrants is to cover up the truth that the people who have suffered from the inherent inequalities that define our country do not deserve either justice or fairness, to paper over the crimes of a country that does not provide health care for its citizens, education for its youth, and wages, endless war at the expense of social services. To maintain this imbalance of power, there must be a story to justify it. And that narrative is wrought in part by the over-policing that has made America a veritable copland, a social construction of a criminal class that deserves neither agency or comfort. I'd like to thank our guest, Kevon Miller, for joining us and sharing his fight for police accountability. And of course, I'd like to thank my co-host, Janis, for his research and writing. This is the end of Season 1 of the Police Accountability Report, and we will be back December 5th, 2019. But that doesn't mean stop sending us your tips. Please send us your evidence of police misconduct to par@therealnews.com. Please like and share and comment on the show. We really appreciate you, and you know that I read and respond to your comments. And of course, you can follow me at Taya's Baltimore on Twitter or Facebook. I'm your host, Taya Graham, and I want to thank you for joining me for the Police Accountability Report. See you in 3 weeks.